All right, what's up? Going to be talking about what I like to call powerhouse setups today, sort of a classic setup before mythics, before evolutions, before challenges, and before nightmare levels were really necessary. A setup similar to this, maybe with pony sparks instead of slime king, swap it out for the position of electric archangel, just very minor changes. A setup very similar to this was basically considered the strongest DPS setup, right, by a lot of people, utilizing Felina, Hellhound Mighty, and then utilizing a permastall when that was still a thing. And so this setup was, yeah, it was considered to be sort of the end game setup and kind of the best setup, right? And, looking back, I wasn't playing during that time, but I'm unsure why this was really considered the strongest setup, right? I understand it is able to stall enemies, it is able to kill enemies, but I think it's not really that fast for farming, right? And there wasn't any reason to play Nightmare during that time. So I think overall, a setup like this was honestly just made to be a setup that can pump out ridiculously unnecessary amounts of damage just to be able to complete a level for fun, right? And there's nothing wrong about this setup. I just think during the time it was made in the permastalling era, right, there wasn't really an efficient use for it. But I think now, as the nightmare levels have become more necessary, as some people now think, how am I supposed to play the game if I don't have mythics? How am I supposed to play if I do have a limited monster collection? And also with the with permastalling being removed, I think this setup actually, this powerhouse setup, I'll call it, actually does have decent potential if you are attempting to do nightmare levels without a lot of resources or units, right? And so what I mean by this is, as you see here, my setup here, 3 gold max Hellhound, 3 gold max Felina. Everything else is decently high leveled. My stuns aren't high level, my speedies max, mighty's max, Archimedes max, all this stuff is max, right? And so I'm having a very easy time completing this level and completing a nightmare level. And I have actually shown a video of me completing nightmare with 3 units with, basically just Felina and some support, which I'll link down below. But I think, not everyone has access to these sort of level 500 units, especially something like a 3 gold Hellhound that requires a lot of grinding to get. Something like, maybe not a level 500 Felina, maybe a level 400 Felina. And I think that's when the concept behind the setup really comes into play, right? This concept of trying to develop a Felina in the back and as many front row stuns as possible, right? And of course, the setup I'm going to talk about is far from the best setup you can use, right? You can definitely use mythics, right? Amaterasu, way better than Felina in this situation. But I'm talking about in the situation where you don't really have access to something like Amaterasu, you don't have access to mythics, and you're kind of playing on, I guess, maybe a newer or account that's not been active for a while, and you're just kind of working with your same old specials, same old stallers, and all that sort of stuff. And I think, I just want to talk about how this setup is still strong, right? And this setup is still good because even if you don't have all these guys at level 400, level 500, all these really high levels, you probably don't need Slime King at level 500, probably don't need a level 401 Ash, probably don't need level 500 Archimedes. Your Hellhound can definitely be lower level, your Felina can definitely be lower level, Mighty at 400 is probably still good, but this setup is generally really good for completing the nightmare levels if you don't have access to more expensive units, right? It's a very solid setup. It's a very good powerhouse setup for getting safe nightmare completes, albeit not the fastest, but it's a very, very solid and very safe, right? You're not running that much of a risk of losing, and you also don't need to invest too many resources to win, right? You're making good use of Hellhound, you're making good use of Felina's damage, you're making good use of the stallers you have access to, and that way you can complete the level, you can prevent enemies from being able to cast their buffs immediately, and you can also switch up some units, right? Maybe you want to put a speedy, maybe you don't have Hellhound, so you put speedy, mighty Felina, and you just add an extra stun in the front row. Maybe you want to, maybe you have one mythic, maybe you have something like an Anubis, and you want to incorporate something like a Death Bite, right? Maybe you want to switch out something like the Slime King for a Death Bite, and you have an Anubis, and that Anubis also combos really well with Felina. This is a bad example I'm talking about because I don't have Anubis, but it's just another example of making the best out of what you have. Maybe replace this yellow Archangel with an Anubis, or this blue Archangel with Anubis, and we swap the Death Bite over Archimedes. Just small changes like that, working with what you have to complete the level, but using this general frame of a bunch of stallers and then, you know, pumping out as much DPS in the back row as possible with your Felina. And this is, you know, the core setup I feel that you want to be building off of. If you have Pony Sparks, even better. Pony Sparks not going to be as good as the unit was before, just because permastalling is of course not here anymore, but I think that goes for most stuns. It only serves to make these, you know, global stunners a little bit better, give them a little bit more use overall, stuff like Archimedes, stuff like Slime King. It's pretty much all I want to talk about today, just, you know, how good this this old best setup, quote unquote, was. Again, you know, not really, oh, not again, but of course not really going to be the best in elemental challenges. They're very demanding of mythics, but if you are trying to do nightmares, this is just a nice solid setup for completing nightmare levels. You don't need to be anywhere close to what I have leveled here. My units are pretty overly leveled for the purpose of showcasing how this setup can be a good budget setup. And of course, you don't need to have these exact units as well, right? The stuns are mainly here just to prevent enemies from casting, prevent stuff like this Rage Fist Shaman from casting. We'll see how we do here, but, you know, yeah, preventing them from casting too many times, preventing the units from going too far. Just, you know, get your nice stuns, get your nice DPS, get your somewhat decent levels, and you can get some free nightmare completes for your weekly mythic gems. That's going to be it for this video. Just want to say that this sort of setup is still decent in the nightmare level stage of the game, but yeah, like, sub, and see ya.